So I've done storytelling my entire life. I started out as a disc jockey for about 30 years or so. I still do some Christmas programs in that regard. And then I was asked to do funerals as a eulogist. And then I just learned some really fascinating things. I learned that at the time after somebody passes away in that room, you get something you hardly ever get anywhere else. You get the truth. And those lessons, that hard-earned wisdom was so mind-blowing that I decided to just get out and tell those stories to other people so they could live the best possible version of their life. So, in the state of South Dakota, there is a sense of community, a sense of family that I think is missing in other states. I'll just give you an example. We have 4 daughters. 2 of them teach at Georgia Morse Middle School in Pierce, South Dakota. And my youngest just took a job teaching there. And she looks out her school window at the Capitol and Dome, a dome in Pierre. And then she walks home to her apartment, which overlooks the reflecting pond, and out her living room window, she sees the same Capitol. And she's like 200 yards away from the governor. She lives a kid just starting out in life lives 200 yards away from the governor of our state. And I just don't think that happens anywhere else. We call her Governor Noem out of respect. But you know, when we're just talking, we call her Christy, right? Because we're family. And there's something about that that is precious to me. I'm also honored to be talking to a group of people that I deeply admire and respect, veterans and those who serve veterans, for a cause that is second to none, on a 4th topic that is dear to my heart, and that is that story. Now, you know that I'm a storyteller. I was talking to a kid, he was 28 years old. I thought he had the world by the tail, and he did not seem that way. He seemed depressed and discouraged. And I said, "What's going on?" And he started talking about issues that he was facing, mistakes that he has made, things he wasn't doing well. And I thought, no, listen to you. And I reminded him of his history, of his past. I then said, "These are your strengths." Then I focused on the obstacles he would face and what his purpose was. And suddenly he was reminded of his story. And with optimism, he left the room. And this happens to people, doesn't it? It happens to people. We forget our story. It happens to companies. It even happens to countries. And this evening, I want to remind you of the most remarkable story, America's story. I'm going to use stories, I'm going to use help from poetry and from music, the award-winning El Riad Shrine Chanters. Mary Michaels is accompanying, and the Honorable Mrs. Libby Gould is running the whole darn show. And so here's one thing. After I'm done tonight, if you like the story and if it helps you out, there's some business cards on the table. Just send me an email and I'll send you the transcript. That's fair, right? Look at each other and say, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. Is that fair, Chanters? Yep. That's fair. Is that fair, Libby? If Libby says it's fair, it's fair. All right. So let's just start talking about America's story. For thousands of years, the cycle of power has been constant, hasn't it? There's been a group of people and somebody comes to power and then they start to grab onto more power and they start to keep the power. They start to put more people down and they turn to tyrants. And then after the tyranny becomes overbearing, then somebody else comes up and they take out that tyrant. And then that person coalesces power, and that person tries to grab on the more power until they become corrupt. And so we see the cycle of power that we have seen for thousands of years through history. And if you're listening now and thinking, well, that's not right, that's because you're an American. For thousands of years, that was not a topic that you would talk about. Well, it's just the way it is. To the victors, go the spoils. Might makes right. But to you, you say, no, that's not fair. And that is what you have inherited as an American. Now, do you understand that there are certain genetic things that you inherit, but your American persona, it comes from the stories of others who have gone before you. And this story of fairness, we get from an 11-year-old boy. And it was not fair. His father has died. He left the inheritance to the older half-brother. This meant that he was stuck in the backwoods of nowhere, no chance for any sort of advancement. He could no longer go to school. He tries to join the Navy. His mother says no. There goes any chance of military advancement. And it just doesn't seem fair. He has skills, he has ambitions, but he's not going anywhere. When he's 15 years old, he gets a chance to be a surveyor, to go out into a wealthy landowner's possessions, hundreds of thousands of square miles of land, and just see the lay of the land. And that also is not fair, because a military group comes and it says, we need a guide to guide us through this wilderness, and they hire him, and it's not fair because they look down at him. He has the skills, but he doesn't talk like them, he doesn't dress like them, he doesn't have manners like them. He's a hick. He's a rube. Dripping with disdain, they called him a Yankee Doodle. And it was not fair. Now later, he marries a wealthy widow and gets into farming and sets himself up pretty good. But then he runs into more unfairness, because at the time he had no choice of where he could sell his goods. It had to be sold to one place and one place only, one country. And that country would dictate the price. He'd put it on a ship, he'd send it overseas. Somebody would inspect the crop and say, oh, you had some spoilage, didn't tell you about that. Oh, we sold it at the bottom of the market, sorry. And oh, all the goods you wanted to exchange, well, we're giving you this instead. The finer things, we're giving you mediocre stuff, and that's just what you'll have to do with. But that's okay, because you're a Yankee Doodle. Oh, yes. And we're taxing it too. And oh, yes, you have no control about what we're going to do with the taxes. Do you know who I'm talking about yet? This is George Washington, isn't it? This is George Washington, and it's not fair. Now, he could have just let her go, because like I said, he was doing well. But he risked everything. And with little or no military training, he led a rabble of disorganized, underfunded, under-equipped soldiers against the most powerful military in the world. Talk about a risk. Talk about a risk. But he did it. And then he did something that was completely unheard of. After getting power, he gave it back to the people. And this astonished King George III. This astonished Europe. This has astonished history. The cycle of power he chose not to be a part of. After risking everything, he gave the power back to the people. Unbelievable. Now, this is the song they sang to King George. And listen to what the focus of this song is. I'm just going to give you the words. God save great George our King. Long live our noble King. God save the King. Send him victorious, happy, and glorious, long to reign over us. God save the King. It's no accident that we took that exact same tune and we completely changed the meaning by changing the words. They taught it when I was a little kid. I was so young, I didn't know what the word meant. I didn't know what a 'tis of thee was. My country 'tis of thee. And maybe you haven't listened to the words that completely rearranged and described what government could be. So listen to the words again for the first time, and hear the themes of liberty, justice, and freedom that are your inheritance. And now let me talk about the other thing you've inherited as Americans. You are dreamers. Oh, you have a small dream. Maybe you think you want to do something. Maybe you want to make something. Maybe it's a big dream. Well, 250 some odd years ago, an extremely bright young man had an enormous dream. He said, you know those old republics from ancient Greece and Rome? Maybe we could bring those back. And we could have countries that were run by the people. Then they said, you are a fool. That is radical, that is dangerous. Don't you know that power belongs to the wealthy, to the entitled, and to the elite? And he said, now wait a minute. I believe a yeoman farmer, just your average person, has the wisdom innate to them to be able to govern themselves. In fact, not only do they have that possibility, he said that's their right. He said that is their God-given right, that they would be able to have a life of their purpose, seek liberty, the pursuit of happiness. All of that was their inalienable right. And then he wrote it down on a piece of paper, and he committed high treason. And this is Thomas Jefferson, and he stood right next to George Washington. High treason. What does that look like? No, they don't hang you. They start with hanging you. Apparently that doesn't kill you. They cut you down in front of the jeering mob. While you're still gasping for breath, they cut you open. Then they spill out your bowels, and then they light those on fire. Apparently that doesn't kill you either. Then they cut off your head. That kills you. Then they cut you in 4 pieces while the entire crowd jeers at you. The traitor. All dreams require risks. And they risked. Not only did he write that down on a piece of paper and sign his death warrant, 55 other dreamers did it as well. And that's your inheritance. You got that from them. And this dreams have another component that I want you to just think about. Not only are they risky, they have a life of their own. And they grow above and beyond. This dream, this small group of people that had, hey, every man should have a right to vote, grew into every man, regardless of their color, should have a right to vote, grew to every person should have a right to vote. And this dream within this country became known as the American dream. And it wasn't just for America, it was global. All over the world, people looked at the dream, the American dream, and they said, hey, why not us? Some of them in this country dreamed. Some of them came from other countries to seek the American dream, and some looked at our country and said, hey, they can do it, why not us? And we put a statue up in one of our biggest city harbors. And we put a poem at the bottom when we invited the world to dream with us. We said, bring us, you're tired, you're poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Bring these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door, and they can see that light all over the world. There is no English dream. There is no Russian dream. There is no German dream. There is the American dream, and it lights the world to this day. Dreaming is who you are. Dreaming is part of your story. This third characteristic that is you, sacrifice. Sacrifice is both powerful and important. Anything worthwhile has required sacrifice. This boy, how poor was he? Well, he didn't grow up in a log cabin. The talk is he was born in a log lean-to with a dirt floor. He just didn't talk about it much. Almost no formal education, but he taught himself and climbed to the peak of his profession, got into politics, and climbed to the peak of that profession. And then he sacrificed all of it. He sacrificed his health, his family, his wealth, his safety, his reputation, and his life. Because, yes, that is Abraham Lincoln. And why did he sacrifice it? He could have stayed in law and been fine. But why? Because there were two flaws that he felt a deep need to sacrifice this new country. It was the evil of slavery, and it was the limits of our government at the time. At the time, everybody was from a state. You would say, I am a Pennsylvanian, I'm a New Yorker, I'm a Texan. I guess they still say that. Anyway, you would say your state first, and the nation would come secondarily, right? He came into office as Abraham Lincoln, President of these United States. But as he said, a house divided amongst itself cannot stand. And so he built a union, a nation, strong. And now we stand on the world stage and have for 100 years and more against the evils that have besieged the world. And we stay strong as a union because of somebody's sacrifice. Sacrifice, it's what you see and innately do. When you see injustice, when you see something, you innately feel you need to sacrifice. And maybe that's with a petition, maybe that's with money, maybe it's joining a group. The military, certainly you understand sacrifice. These are my dad's dog tags. I keep them in my shop. He gave 4 years changing oil in a motor pool in Germany. Some give weekends. Some gave 2 years. Some gave 4 years. Some gave their life. If you don't know much about the military, why don't you ask a veteran why they give you 2 dog tags? And the answer they give you will help you understand sacrifice. For almost 150 years, we have stood as a nation because every generation, another group of young men and women stand up and sacrifice so this great American experiment can still be alive. The sacrifice of blood, sweat, tears has soaked into your soul and is part of your story. So I just have a few more things to kind of end this on a positive note. I want to talk about some of the character attributes that are yours as Americans. And one is generosity. I don't know if it's the beauty or obvious bounty from sea to shining sea, but this country is a place of bounty. The agricultural system of this country, second to none. The crops we grow feed the world, and we have a river that runs right through it and takes that right to market. No other country can boast that. And from agriculture came agribusiness. And from agribusiness came regular business. We are a country of tremendous wealth. There has never, ever been a country as wealthy as the one we're in right now, and it's not even close. The life that you live, the food you eat, the way you sleep, the freedoms you have, no king has ever had those in centuries past, but it's yours every single day. And that generosity poured on you comes right back out of you. You give. It is known that Americans are generous. In other countries, they'll have clubs where the wealthy will gather. But in America, they have service clubs. Now look at it. Kiwanis, that's out of Detroit. Lions started in Chicago. Moose, Louisville. Cosmopolitans, Kansas City. The Rotary, that started in Chicago. The Eagles started in Seattle. Sertoma started in Kansas City. And the Shriners started in New York City. That's a branch of the Masons, and they're the ones who are performing tonight. It is their generosity that is poured back, and it's not just on us. Every one of those service clubs I'm talking about is international. As we give, we pour out onto a world. Some things like March of Dimes, for example. Or how about this? Care package. I didn't even know what that meant, a care package. Cooperative for Americans Remittance to Europe. Started after World War II and keeps on going. The generosity of America is astonishing, and yet I'm just going to throw this out. It's diminishing. Service clubs, not many anymore. Numbers are waning, they're getting older. The chanters here, they're not here just because they like to sing. Every dime they raise goes to children's hospitals. As they've been given, they pour out generously. I just want to remind you of this part of your American story. In the annals of time, it is not our amazing standard of living. Our true prosperity is in our amazing standard of giving. And I want to talk about equality. Oh my goodness gracious, in the United States you can start anywhere and go anywhere. You can start anywhere and you can go anywhere. There is no caste system here. Just work and go. We don't care about the prefix, we care about the person. Look at the language. For example, when they started this country, they went to the old Robert Rules of Order. They looked at the lowest possible title. What's the guy who just sits in the room and temporarily presides over the meeting, giving direction? It's like the lowest ranked job title. The person who presides at that meeting was called a president. And that's the job title they gave to the leader of the United States of America when it started. And we changed what that word means. Now president means much more than it did when we started. We make old things new. New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Orleans, New Mexico, New Haven, Newcastle, New Hope, New Bedford, New Braunfels, New Britain, New Berlin, New Albany. There's even a place in New York called New City, New York. We start and we complete, and we know that with this ability, we can make old things new. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. And in that world, we are all equals. And we believe in God. And it's saying, which came first? Did God create man or did man create God? We answer it in our coins. In God we trust. Some people say, hey, where in the world is God? As Americans, we seek And we say, there are signs of God in the world. And we see it in our history. I mean, look at the 56 people who put their lives on the line, 13 disparate colonies. How could that possibly have happened? We don't think of Providence, Rhode Island. We think of Providence. No money, no military. How in the world did this country even start? Well, you'd say George Washington. How often does a guy like that come along that gives everything back to the people? How did he... Back when I was talking when he was a guide for the British, every single officer on horseback was shot off the saddle except him. Afterwards, he looked at his uniform, 4 bullet holes, not a scratch on him. In his diary, he described the bullets whistling by him, and he said it was charming. And he didn't mean cute, he meant mesmerizing. 20 years later, he's sitting around a campfire, and a native warrior comes up and says, I recognize you. On the night of that battle, I was in charge of my warriors and the musketeers. I said, shoot him off the saddle. And we tried and we tried and we tried, and I said, finally, give up, because the Great Spirit is watching over that man. And then he looked at him and he said, you will be the leader of a great nation. And then the guy disappeared. And everybody looked at George and he went, I don't know. Providence. Providence, the national anthem, bombs bursting in air, 100 ships firing on Fort McHenry. You know, they scored a direct hit. A bomb landed on the powder magazine at Fort McHenry. And it was a dud. Those of you with military training knows what happens when you hit the powder magazine. It's over for square miles, and it didn't happen. Abraham Lincoln was in Washington, D.C., which is a southern city. There were plots on his life every day of his life. He took the same route to work every day. They shot his hat off. It isn't that he died, it's a miraculous that he lived long enough to purge the nation of the evil of slavery and condense it. And we see it over and over, the fingerprints. Teddy Roosevelt. Okay, he did go up San Juan Hill. They shot at him. They missed him as well. He came back, that cowboy, to wreak havoc on New York politics, and he was going to wreck the political machine. And they said, oh no, you don't. We're getting rid of that guy. He's too much trouble. Where can we put him where he can cause us no more trouble? What's the most worthless political job in the country? Vice President of the United States. And what did Providence do with that decision? We see the fingerprints of Providence, and we see it on ourselves. Those are God-given. You seek justice, that's given you. Generosity, that's given you. You dream, that's given you. You sacrifice, that's given you. You see good and evil. You see it in the world, and it bothers you. You see it in our country, and it bothers you. And you see it in yourself, and that bothers you. And it gives you the need and the desire to change. And that desire is also your gift as an American. The sickly son of an oligarch, a robber baron, the New York elite. This kid loved his dad. He could never eclipse him in business, so he got into politics. And there was a book out, a picture book called How the Other Half Lived, and it made Theodore Roosevelt sick at heart to see how the immigrants lived, and he wanted to change, and he proceeded to change fundamentally so many things in our country. But I tell you the thing I most appreciate, he didn't see America as just a bottom line economy. He saw it as a beautiful place. And he established the national parks, saying, I want that beauty available for all Americans everywhere. And he did it, and it's there, and it's beautiful. And these 4 faces, there they are at a national park. Now I want you to look closer. at those faces. Can you see the flaws? Can you see the cracks? Those are yours too. Those men aren't gods. They're just men. And they made mistakes and they were flawed, and you make mistakes and you are flawed. But your story is not about your mistakes. It's not about your past. It's not about your flaws. It's about your potential on the world stage. That is your inheritance, and it's what the world demands of you. And stubborn optimism. Yes. We actually believe we can do it. George Washington, when he was general and they were out of funds, he said, "Come on, just take it over. We're going to lose anyway. Just take it." And he said, "No, I will not wrest power from those. I'm giving it back to the people. Absolutely not. I will believe in a possibility of a country by the people, for the people, of the people. I believe that democracy that once was alive in antiquity could be again. And so we still believe that. Yes, we fight with each other. But we fight with each other. We have dreams, desires. We want to sacrifice. We have faith. We believe in generosity. We believe our story is just beginning. And we're not done yet. But you have to make it so. You know, when the country was about 40 years old, the Battle of Fort McHenry, Francis Scott Key is trying to negotiate the release of a prisoner. He's on an enemy ship, the British ship, and they're just bombarding Fort McHenry all through the night, and you can't see anything. You just hear the shriek of bombs and bursts, and you say, is the flag still there? Is the great American experiment dead? Is it alive? And he's gripping the sides of the ship, peering into the night, asking, is the flag still there? And this is the only anthem I'm aware of that ends with a question. And the question isn't in antiquity. The question is the future. Right now, all over the world, people wonder, are we here? Is the American dream alive? Can we look to somebody to lead us into the future? And you know what? I can't answer that question. That's not a government question. It's not a president's question. It's not a political party's question. It's your question. You're the one they want to hear. This is your national anthem, and people are dying to hear you sing it. So if you believe it, then stand with us as we sing our national anthem. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose bright stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bursting in air, gave proof to the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
If you're interested, please reach out to me. I'm looking forward to working with you. Until that time, I'm Jeff Gould. God bless.